Hi, everyone. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Our 2 Cents on Your Dollars. I'm James Enriquez.
I'm James Credo.
I'm Leo Chang.
And we are here with Valerie Rivera, licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist and owner of Inner Solace Therapy. Valerie, welcome.
Hi.
Hey.
Hello.
Hello.
So, this is a free session, right?
You may or may not get a bill.
That's her clock.
Yeah.
No, all kidding aside, we really appreciate you being here. So let me tell you a little backstory about how this came to be. So a few episodes back, Leo pointed out that the Certified Financial Planner designation requires 7% of the content in behavioral finance. So we got to thinking, that is a huge percentage, because back when I started, it was non-existent. So we thought you could help whip us up into shape and make us better investors. So that's why you are here.
Great. Okay. Let's
No
see what
pressure.
we can do.
No
pressure.
No pressure.
Yeah.
So if returns aren't there, it's
Right. You're going to send me a bill.
right, exactly.
No correlation.
So one of the things that we found one of the things that we found most interesting is behavioral biases. There's a lot of overlap between behavioral biases in finances and just generally. But I think overconfidence bias is a big one. What tips or what can you tell us about how to overcome overconfidence bias? What is it?
Right. Okay. Can I just preface this talk with my stance on, finances and where I'm going to be coming from is basically, the type of work that I do is working with adults that have experienced traumatic issues in their life, in childhood particularly, right? So what I do is help them connect the way that they think, the way that they feel, the way that they behave from childhood experiences, right? Whether that's relationships with parents or whoever raised them, different types of circumstances that they endured growing up. And one of them is money stories. And so what I think is important to understand is that all of the different biases, right? Behavioral, cognitive, they all stem from somewhere. And that is essentially our childhood stories. So when we think about like overconfidence bias, it comes from this idea that we believe in our stance, right, in something, and sometimes we tend to overestimate what decisions we're making. So we tend to have all biases, right, tend to have a narrow focus. And what that means is that the way that we think, we become hyper vigilant for searching for evidence that supports the way that we think. So when we think something, it's going to create an emotion. And that emotion is going to then tell us how we're going to behave. So if you think about, you get really excited about an investment deal. And then you think, okay, this investment in particular is going to gain so much traction, and I get excited about that. And so the behavior associated with that is that I'm either going to continue to give and give and give, right? But at times, the bias comes from, again, we're so narrow focused that the outside perspective is trying to tell us a different storyline, and we're too, in a sense, blind to see that. Right. So overconfidence bias comes from this idea that it's already made traction, and that is the only way that we know how to continue to deliver.
Okay. You said something there that reminded me. You said we seek information to support our overconfidence. That's confirmation
bias.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Confirmation bias is, again, like we have the way thoughts and the way that we look at the world, right? So I always tell clients, like, the lens that you tend to have on is going to be very different from the person sitting next to you, right? Because that lens is a story of how we've viewed the world, right? How our parents or how our caregivers, how our friends or social circles have told us this is essentially the way that you live. This is the way that you fit in this environment. And so confirmation bias is us searching for those different ways that tells us that we are correct, right? That we are on the right path.
Okay, so let me give you a real world example. So I'm talking to a client or prospective client, and I say, hey, you know what? This is what you should do with your money. well, but I got 20% return every year for the last 5 to 10 years. And you're telling me I'm going to get half of that. And you start looking at the portfolio and it's like, well, yeah, you got 20% a year because you're investing in technology, and technology has done really, really well. In my opinion, there's a fine line, right? It's you're willing to take that risk, so you're okay with that, or you're overconfident in your ability to pick stocks and to pick investments. So what are some things that you can do to identify, to take those blinders off that you mentioned, and try to do the right thing?
Yeah. So what's important is that we kind of we have to challenge ourselves to step outside of that box, right? Outside of that narrow mindset that we have essentially established for ourselves, or that the world and society has established for us, right? It has contributed to that. And so I think about like, how else can you find resources outside of what you are used to? So if you are so used to, I'm going to go with like the news, right? If you are so used to watching Fox, right, news, and the reason for that is because it tends to give you and deliver, right, confirm that what you believe to be true is true. But you may deviate from other news sources because they challenge those assumptions that you have established for yourself. So then they're not right, they're wrong, and they don't know what they're talking about. So when we have to be able to say, okay, if I'm going to expand those blinders, I want to be able to look for resources outside of what I've already been used to, right? So you want to do the research. You want to probably look for or talk to people that tend to have a different opinion in what you're used to hearing, because then that will allow you to, again, challenge your perspective and your mindset on something different. You want to open up different types of, like, for example, if I don't have a financial advisor, right? And I only seek, I don't know, what's another one? Like, who else can I see? A CPA, right? Like, yeah. Then maybe I want to navigate in a different direction, right? Maybe I want to interview different types of people in that financial world to give me different types of perspectives. Otherwise, we're going to continue to seek what we know.
Have you found that people are willing to step outside the box, see a different perspective without pain? I'm just talking about myself. I'm very arrogant. I love my biases.
Right, yeah.
And so have you found that when you tell them this, hey, step outside the box, see other perspectives, listen,
Yeah.
are they willing to do, or do they make the change after they realize, oh, I guess I was wrong? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they come to see me, if you come to see me, you will be challenged. No, I think people, like, there's this saying in therapy, right? Like, you have to meet your clients where they are. Obviously, like, my goal is going to be very different from my client's goal, right? But what I'm going to do is try to help them reach a certain level in which they're saying, like, if I want to meet X, Y, and Z, but they continue to do this that is completely opposite to meeting X, Y, Z, my job is to help them see that. You know, so I have to be able to provide them with the resources to equip them to be able to meet X, Y, and Z. Right? Otherwise, you know, if you feel like you're not ready to go there, then I need to think about what are ways to challenge you to do that, right? And essentially confront you and call you out on that.
Oh, wow, cool.
Okay. This question. So this podcast is mainly for clients or people that invest, but other financial advisors watch this too. What are some ways that maybe financial advisors can help their clients overcome this overconfidence bias?
Well, I think that can be difficult sometimes, right? One of the questions that you also asked me about was previously was financial advisors, right? Therapists, and then what was the other one? The behavioral,
Licensed financial therapist.
licensed financial therapist, yes. And so I thought about, okay, one of the questions you asked was like, when do you refer a client to which person? And so when you think about a therapist, right, like my position, if somebody comes to me and they're saying, I have these money stories that are very difficult for me to navigate in my personal life, in my, marriage, whatever that looks like, then my job is to help them again connect thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and then physical reactions, right? Because anytime we think about money, it's going to create a physical reaction. We're either going to, depending on our money story, we're either going to get really, really anxious, right? And our body's going to show that, or we're going to get really, really excited, right? And so they come to me and I work with them on that aspect. But if they come to me and they say, I'm having all of these different, struggles, and I also want to learn how to invest and I want to learn how to use my money, then a financial therapist may be better equipped to do that, right? Because it's a holistic type of therapy that they're going to provide. But a financial advisor is when you are going to let them know, you're going to educate them on the different types of investments, right? The different ways in which their money can grow for them and the way that the money can work for them, right? I have this one person that told me that money is used as a resource for them to grow in the direction that creates abundance for them. And I thought that was beautifully said, because other people see money as a scarcity situation, right? Where again, I hoard my money because I never had it growing up. And so now I hoard it and I don't know what to do with it. But if I go speak to a financial advisor that tells me, hey, if you put all of this money in these different investments, the likelihood of them doing that is going to be probably very low, because their mindset is going to come from a place of, what happens if I lose it, right? What is that called? Aversion.
Loss aversion bias.
Yeah, loss aversion bias. Yeah, right. And so why would they want to do that? So for you, I think that you also have to think about where they are at, right? Are they trying to get educated? And they may come to you a few times and may ask you the same questions over and over again. I don't know if you have clients like that. And you're like, I've been saying the same thing. But it's because they're not ready to invest. They're not ready to make that. What they're trying to do is gain trust, right? They're trying to gain clarity and they're trying to gain trust. Like, are you doing this in their best interest? Even though they've sought you out, they still don't know, how much they can actually afford to invest.
It's interesting. One of the things when we were going through early development as advisors, and in a previous firm we worked with, veteran advisors, whenever I asked them when working with different clients, what are some tactics and some things that you do to help influence clients to make some decisions from an investment aspect, whether it's making changes, adjusting asset allocation. And one thing that I got from a lot of those veterans was, I like to press on the point that individuals will take action based on two things: fear and greed. And to me, I thought that was really interesting. And today I think about it as well too. Taking actions like that can trigger more than just fear and greed, especially if those are big influences or things that they struggle with because of, family history or things that they grew up with emotionally, things like that as well too. Is there specifically for me, when I thought about that, I thought, hey, from a counseling aspect, getting clients to understand the importance of what we're trying to do and the influence and the decision making that we're providing to them, doing so outside of just that realm. Are those typically those two things that you see, especially from family history and things like that, from those money stories? Are those the two biggest things you typically see?
I don't know, I guess from my perspective, if they're the two biggest things, right? But you're talking about fear comes from a place of loss or potential loss, right? Which means that if I'm going to delve into that with a client, I'm going to try to understand, well, what happened growing up, right? And then you hear oh, well, we don't have basic necessities. And it's, you come into this money and all of a sudden it's well, now I'm going to keep it because I never had it, right? So fear is definitely one of the highest pain points in clients when it comes to financial circumstances. But when you talk about greed, it also comes from a place of abundance, right? Which I mentioned earlier, which means that they probably may have grown up, either they came from nothing and they had to, work their way through it, or they came from everything and abundance has been one of those positive mindsets that they've created for themselves, right? Or that family has helped create for them. So I think it can come from various aspects that may be, I always think of like, okay, what is on the surface level and then what is like deep rooted. And so sometimes that may be surface and sometimes that may be deep rooted depending on who you're working with.
Is the first place to start recognizing that you have a bias?
Yeah.
Is that like okay.
Yeah. I mean, anybody that says that they are unbiased in certain situations is probably not very self-reflective and
No, I mean, we're completely unbiased here.
Yeah.
I mean, we're different.
Those,
we're different kind of financial investors and advisors.
Those NFT purchases in 2022, no bias whatsoever.
You didn't have to tell anybody about that.
It's out now.
Those, blinders on to the full effect.
Hey, I've just gotten a couple of offers on some
Oh,
recently.
yeah.
So it's been working out for you.
I mean, the offer is lower than what right now I'm suffering from loss aversion bias.
Loss aversion bias.
So,
Go to therapy.
well, okay. So you know what's interesting is a lot of places try to quantify the value of an advisor. Mm-hmm. Now they put the number all over the place, okay? But most of them say something like a financial advisor adds value through behavioral coaching. We help you recognize some of the biases that you're suffering from. Loss aversion bias. You feel the pain of a loss twice as intensely as the joy of a gain. Or mental accounting. Hey, that's an inheritance I got from my dad. He really liked that stock. I don't care if it's a bad stock. I'm holding on to it and just watch it go down.
But why do they do that though?
Well, okay, so you're right. Yeah, there's some deep-rooted issues.
Right.
So where I was going with this is it true? If we can figure out a way to help people, either us do it or through therapy with you, can we really potentially improve returns for people? I said that tongue-in-cheek earlier, but I'm almost getting the sense that we possibly can.
Yeah, that person, right, is holding on to something because it's emotional. It's an emotional attachment for them. And one thing that you have to remember is that people tend to use either the right side of the brain or the left side of the brain more so than the person sitting next, right? So you have to identify, like, is this person coming from a logical standpoint or are they coming from an emotional standpoint? And that's where you're able to then tap in, right? So that person was coming to you from an emotional standpoint. And if you're trying to reason and provide logic, you're not going to get through to them, right? They're going to see you as a threat. And so it's important to be able to, in a sense, like, pay attention to the words that they're using and to their resistance to making change, because then you can tap into it in a different way. And I'm not going to give you all my tools because.
Okay. I was gonna say, and then so
then what happened?
More?
and
Does it say more?
yeah.
And how would you say that to
how
them
would you-
exactly?
Where do I put my hands when I say this?
This is being recorded, right?
It is.
Watch it back.
It is interesting though, because we do. I feel like I hear from clients so much more frequently when markets are down than when markets are up, and it's one of those things that we're very proactive with clients in general, but coming from them, from their proactiveness, contacting us, the log historically, it's like there's some type of correlation here that we hear from you calling us more times when markets are down than when markets are up. So
Because it's fear-based for them. When markets are down, they come from a place of fear, or where are they coming from?
yeah,
Place of fear, right?
it's fear. It always is, and there's always the concern of, is this going to continue, right? Or is this different? Where we try to provide them with as much relative information as possible to show them historically that hey, this is no different than anything before, right? But for whatever reason, there's something stemming in them emotionally that gives them a belief that it could be, or that this could continue, or losses could worsen. And it's talking them through that process and getting them to understand, this situation is no different than what it is in the past and what we're trying to achieve. But some of the tools and some of the teaching moments and different things that we can do to help them through that process, I think is extremely important and valuable.
Yeah, I think one of the most common biases that we tend to deal with more of on a consistent basis is recency bias. That's what it seems like. Right now, with the markets at a high, most of the calls or conversations I typically have is, should we take more risk?
Right.
And it's always interesting to me to have those conversations, because when the market is down, that, you know, one of the what you're told as an investor is buy low, sell high, and sometimes you just overlook it because it sounds so easy. But you know, in our industry, that's just not what we experience. When the market is low, nobody's wanting to buy more or invest more. Usually we get those conversations right now, you know, when the markets are high. So I feel like that's like the most consistent one. And you've worked with clients for several years and you have the same conversation over and over again, but it keeps happening. And so I don't know if there's something I need to change, or maybe the messaging, but I feel like that's a really common one that we experience.
So the recency bias is when you've made an investment of some sort and it goes well. So you're coming from a place of like, it goes well, right? And so again, what does that create for the client themselves, right? It creates a lot of excitement and a lot of like, again, they start to believe that, okay, this is going to grow in abundance. And so then I need to continue to invest, right? Yeah. And so I think like when you're saying like a client comes to you with some concerns, right, and the market is down, what they're looking for from you is, again, they want to be validated in the way that they're feeling and the way that they're thinking, right? But they also want to, in a sense, be soothed by whatever education or information you have to offer them of like, it's going to be okay, right? Things are going to go back to normal, or you know that it goes this way. And when you have the same conversations over and over again, I don't know necessarily that you have to do something completely different, like change the entire way that you work, but you have to remind yourself that, okay, if I tap into whatever they are experiencing right now, right, emotion or logic, then that is a direction that I need to be able to go into with them, so that way they don't feel like they're being unheard or like they're not being, dismissed, Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that everybody's biased. So
We have biases in different areas of our life, yes.
right. So how do you know when it's the level and like, hey, we might need to enlist some outside help?
When you go back to what their original goal was, right? Initially, clients come to you and they say, this is my goal, right? I want to invest in XYZ, or I want to buy property here. I want to, whatever that looks like. And they start to, I would say, like, resist your offerings. They resist the different ways in which you're trying to get them to that goal. You have to go back and reevaluate, like, is this still the goal that we're working on? Because it's not working, right? Mm-hmm. So when you become repetitive and you start getting frustrated with yourself, right? Not with yourself, but when you start getting frustrated with the situation and you're like, okay, we're not making changes. We're not treading in the direction. Then this is when you have those conversations of like, okay, we've done this and it doesn't seem, that this is a direction you want to continue to move in. How about we start to employ different resources for you, right?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about the licensed financial therapist. Okay, so what would that look like? Like, hey,
yeah, tell me what you think it would look like.
Mr. and Mrs. Client, I'm not going to say you need therapy, but I know someone that can help with your issues.
Hey, you're in luck.
You put the other hand.
We have three that we refer to. Pick one.
One being me.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. How would that go over? Like, hey, I'm sensing some mental accounting bias here. Let's talk about your money story. Like, what is that? What a financial therapist would do? But by the way, I don't mean to make light of that designation. It's actually pretty neat to see how serious it is. It's an actual graduate certificate in a lot of major universities in the health. In the human and health sciences department, not even in the business department. So it tells me like it's a real thing.
Yeah.
I just don't know. Like, what would that look like?
How would you provide them with those resources?
I don't know. I just can't imagine. Maybe I'm too narrow-minded. Maybe I'm too inside the box, but I can't, I would not feel comfortable identifying a bias and
calling them out,
putting
calling
that
them out.
therapist hat on,
Right,
and
right.
and going through some what is it cognitive behavioral CBT or
Right.
whatever, you know.
Yeah. Well, you think about different avenues in which your clients can gain from, right? So maybe you don't just tell them, hey, you probably should go see this person, right? You tell them, hey, these are different resources for you. Maybe you want to look into one of these, right? And so you tell them, then this is what they can do for you here, this is what they can do for you here, right? So you provide them different avenues for them. You don't tell them you need to go, the way that I like sometimes with my clients, when I say like, okay, I think this is a time where you want to consider seeing a psychiatrist for medication management, I tell them what the goal is when they first started therapy, right? Which is what I'm saying, what is the goal? And then how maybe there are barriers or obstacles to getting there. And sometimes we need people to help us, other people in different avenues to help us. And this is what I think may be, helpful for you. And sometimes clients will say, absolutely not, what else do you recommend? And we'll go in that direction. But what I'm saying for you is that, okay, these are the different resources. You explain it to them, you let them sit with it, and then they decide.
Yeah, love it. One of the goals that we help people reach is retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do a really good job at helping them prepare financially. But sometimes major life transitions like that, people aren't mentally or emotionally prepared for.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. We go through phases in our lives, right? And I think that is important for us to recognize that when we are, young, let's say adults, teenagers, right? 17, 18, we transition into our 20s, and then we transition into the next phase of our life. Like all of those different phases carry different types of identities. And if we continue to move forward in our life without recognizing how our identity changes over time, then we're going to be operating from like a different standpoint, right? Sometimes we operate from this place of like, if we are moving into a new profession, and it comes with all these different responsibilities, but we're used to like 18-year-old not having the same responsibilities, partying it up or not, right? Whatever we decided to do in our 18, 19-year-old days, then it's like our mind is not matching where we currently are. So retirement is entirely different phase of life. You have to remember that people identify primarily with the profession, right? And if they've been doing this profession for 20, 30, 40 years, it's a change. So it's almost like you have to mentally and emotionally prepare for what is life going to look like after I've been doing this for so long. And so their identity starts to shift, right? Who I thought I was in my earlier years is no longer the way that I function in the world. So how do I fit in this environment? How do I fit in my own life, in my children's life, grandchildren, whatever that looks like, without calling myself what I normally do, right? What do you usually, you go to events and you introduce yourself, and what's the first question they ask?
Yeah.
What do you do? Yeah. What do you do? Right. So shifting from I am a therapist to I am retired is a huge emotional and mental shift, so identity change is important.
Is that why people say you should practice retirement? Meaning start already doing the stuff that you're thinking
Yep.
of doing and see, do you actually like that? Does that meet with your identity?
Yeah. This is essentially like in my world, it's a visualization, right? Like visualize 5 years from now, right? Who you want to be, how you want to live that life. And it's the same thing with retirement, right? I think about, I don't work with that population, but I do work with like younger, I used to work at the medical school. And one of the things that I was always tell the students is they were always burnt out, right? Like they were always stressed because of the different demands that came with medical school. And they would always say things like, oh, I wish I could just read a book. I wish I could just, spend time with my family at the beach. I wish. And then there's a transition from after first year to second year where they get the summer off. That's the only summer they get off throughout their medical school career. And it's almost like they didn't know how to function in the world without the stress. And I'm like, go back to all the wishes. Go back to the times that you said you wished you could do XYZ and do it. Like, that's how you want to start living, right? Your life now. It's almost like in these different like parameters throughout the year, right? So if you're able to have them visualize like what they want their life to look like, we always think about that, right? When we work, we always think about like, man, I wish I could just take a month off and do what, right? It's the idea of escaping the stress that you're currently living in. So
I read articles that CEOs and leaders, they have coaches and therapists. Do you think for financial advisors, financial professionals to be more effective, is that something we should proactively do so we can be better advisors to our clients?
I think that learning about human behavior is important, right? It's not just about, I imagine that when you work in finance, that you use a lot of the logical part of your brain, right?
Yeah, that'd be a huge assumption. But
I mean, 2 out of 3 of us here do.
Well, for the most part, right? Like, for the most part. Because and not because that's just what you want to do, but because that's what essentially, like, that's where a lot of the logic and the rationale comes from, is how do I make sure that clients are going to meet their goals, right? And so human behavior is important, right? If you're able to recognize, again, like those 4 things that I mentioned, right? The way that they think, the way that they feel, the way that they behave, and the way that they physically, carry that is important. Remember that we are hardwired for human connection. And if you're not connecting with your client that is sitting in front of you, telling you their worries and concerns or their excitement that may be like, exaggerate it, then it's going to be really difficult for you to align yourself with them. And I imagine that you have found some ways to do that with your clients if you.
It's interesting because we, early on in our career, especially myself, I started in the industry extremely young, right out of college, 23 years old. And one of the difficult things I struggled with was my age working in this industry. And so that was a mental hurdle for me for a while, is getting over the fact that for the most part, the individuals that I wanted to work with, there was going to be a significant age gap. And so to me, and I think it was relative because it was voiced to me a couple of times, the issue with my age and the comfort level that they have working with me. But over time, one of the things that helped me get over that was education and developing more competency and furthering my education and getting different degrees and getting different designations as well too over time. But still now we're a younger group and our age demographic of our clients is so wide. It is interesting to, like, for me, knowing that the way I interact with my 70-year-old retiree isn't the same way I would react or act in having the conversations with that 35-year-old business owner. So over time, trying to learn, how to make them feel comfortable, appease them to a degree, but also still try to be myself at the same time and, do what I do and provide what I can provide. But that's been a big, adapting to that over time has been interesting. But a lot of that, I think that's helped me is the educational aspect, knowing like, hey, what I do, I'm good at because I have the background in education, understanding designations for that. But it was a hurdle for me for a while.
Yeah. Well, I think as a 23-year-old and working with people that have worked their whole life to have, such a big account, they may be coming from a place of, well, what experience do you have, right? You're talking about like the education and all of that is great, but also people thrive off of other people's experience, right? And sometimes if we're able to say, hey, like I've worked in this industry for 20 plus years and I have all of these different, ways in which I've helped my clients, and that speaks a lot louder than the different educational backgrounds, right? And so I think there was difficulty and struggles in working with the population that has said, oh my gosh, like I'm gonna entrust you. And that is the other thing, is that they didn't trust, not necessarily you, but they didn't trust that the experience was enough to support them, right? And so yeah, so and I think that's just a shift that we go through also.
Yeah, since y'all decided to open up and make it about yourselves, I gotta share a really
Finally.
So you were just waiting for someone to do it first.
Yeah, I'll follow.
I'll follow.
Do you need tissues to open up this story?
Should I lay down? Okay, you mentioned earlier about basically affirming people. One of the things that being a student of human behavior, as you mentioned, I sometimes get concerned that our clients can be taken advantage of by somebody that really knows human behavior.
Yeah.
Is that a legit fear? Is that a thing?
Yeah. Okay, so well, should I tell you my secret here?
I mean, everybody would
Yeah.
it could benefit a lot of people.
Well, I think this. If you're able to read someone, right? If you're able to see beyond what is being presented, then there is a lot of room for manipulation. There is a lot of room for advantages, right? Positive and negative. And as humans, we are manipulative, right? Because we always want to be able to try to gain what is in our best interest. And that may not be in the forefront for us, right? We may say, hey, like, I really do want to help you. But there is secondary gain there. And we have to be aware of that. If we're not aware of what we're trying to do here, and if we don't take a step back, we also may unintentionally take advantage of people and manipulate people, right? We try to manipulate systems to work in our favor. And so, yes, understanding human behavior is a power tool. And I always talk to my clients about when they're struggling, with other people in their life. I'm like, okay, but when they say this, what is it that they're trying to communicate to you without communicating it to you? And then when they're able to start doing that, they have so much power over the other person without the other person even realizing it. And it doesn't always have to be for negative gain. It can be for positive gain to resource the individual, but also to, what am I trying to say? Like, strengthen a situation or a circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, I would feel very sleazy if I tried using one of these techniques to keep a client invested, even though I know being invested is the right thing.
Right.
As an example.
Right. So this is where you are upfront and honest with them, right? And when we use manipulative tactics intentionally to take advantage of somebody, then this is where there's wrong, right, in our doing. And so as financial advisors, right, and as a therapist, like, we are not going to do that, right? We're going to be forthcoming in, hey, this is what I think, right, needs to be done. You, at the end of the day, have the responsibility to make that decision for yourself. But let me tell you why I think this is the best way to do that. So when you're honest with them, then you're not hiding anything from them, right? But at the end of the day, they have the responsibility to do that, to do research or to ask questions or to seek outside resources. Otherwise, then, I always say, like, we have a responsibility in how we play a role in every situation. Even if we feel like, hey, but when you said this, when you did this, okay, but my responsibility is how I reacted to that or how I responded to that, right? After you said or did whatever, I still have a role to play in that situation. And it's the same thing with clients, right? We just have to be upfront.
I'm never worried about the manipulation issues. My World Series of Poker history shows that it was terrible. It's never worked out.
That you are unable to, huh?
Unable.
Well, that's why I just ignore feelings, period.
So even computer, James, no feelings.
Stay invested.
Stay invested.
Okay.
Can we so a topic we brought up that we haven't discussed is finances in for marital situations. So I know that historically speaking, that tends to be one of the main reasons that we see higher levels of divorce because of financial discussion, transparency, things like that. it's a tough topic, especially, I mean, in with younger couples getting into that situation, marriage being, now marriage being more than just love, it's a contract that takes into account a lot of other things as well too, right? So what are some things individuals can do to, one, prepare for that going into a new marriage, or if you are currently married, strengthen the relationship when it comes to communication with finances?
Yep. I'm going to go back to basics. Understand your own personal money story. A lot of the times we tend to project our own fears, right? Or excitements, whatever that looks like, into our relationship. Or we tend to displace a lot of anger or frustration. And if we don't understand our money story, right, how we look at money, how we feel about money, then it's going to become an issue in our relationship. Now, if you have, let's say, for example, two people that come together and one person comes from a place of abundance while the other person comes from a place of scarcity, that can be really, really difficult, right? But it can also be a really good thing for the person that comes from a place of abundance, because then they may feel like they can take control and ownership, right? While the other person feels unsure, right, and worried all the time, because again, they don't understand like how money can work for them. So understand your money story is the first thing. The second thing that I recommend is talking about what you want money to look like in your relationship, right? So the relationship you had with money before you got married is going to look different when you get married, or it can look different when you get married, right? So if you're having these ongoing conversations about money right now at the very beginning, then the likelihood of you and your partner establishing a good foundation for your future relationship is going to be very, very high and likely, right? So you talk about money, you talk about like, what are the goals, right? And the other thing is transparency. How much money do we even have, right? How much money
Where's
are
it
we
coming
bringing?
from?
Exactly. Yeah. How much money are we bringing into the marriage, right? Into the relationship, and what do we want to use that money for? Sometimes we have couples that come with debt, right? One person is clean and clear and the other person comes with so much debt. And if we don't have conversations about who's paying for that debt, if we don't have conversations about whether we're keeping monies together or separate, or you're paying for this and you're paying for this, disaster, right? Maybe not at the beginning, but at some point it's going to become disastrous.
So it sounds like it doesn't matter if who's doing what or if you're doing it together, but just having the conversation and the understanding.
Well, you have a conversation, right, but you also have to designate who is in charge of what. Okay. Yeah, you can't just assume, right? The responsibility has to lie on both people or on one person if the other person is okay with that, right? Like, it's not like you have to take care of this and I take care of this. No, it's, hey, you take care of everything and like, I'm good. I don't have any problems with that. Then that's a decision that you both make together. It's the assumptions, right? The assumed roles or responsibilities that probably get us into trouble in our relationships. Yeah. And you don't have the conversation once or twice. You have the conversation ongoing, because remember, you're not making the same amount of money. At least that's the hope, right? That you're not making the same amount of money when you first get married, right, and 10, 20 years later. Like that continues. Again, the hope is that it continues to shift upward. And every time you gain new resources or new monies, right? New investments of some sort, you have to have those conversations. One thing when I work, so my other specialty is working with couples. And one thing that I recommend when they're having money issues or money problems is that they have money dates. And it doesn't have to be this thing like, oh my gosh, we have to sit and we have to go over the bill. Like, I really recommend for it to make it fun, because money doesn't have to be such a hardship. It could really bring awareness and insight to how money can be a resource for the family. So money dates, depending on how often, or not how often, but how in need they are of recognizing changes, then, we go with weekly into monthly, right? Into every 6 months, into yearly, whatever that looks like. But you have to be having money dates with your partner. Even if you are the sole person that brings it in, it's unfair for your partner to not know where that money's going.
You know what would be really fun?
Tell me.
To inject a financial advisor in that money date. I mean,
I'll give them.
As they're
I'll give
having
them
the
your
conversation.
card.
I mean, I'm just saying.
Hovering?
Just drop in from the rafters.
No?
You guys are looking for one. Right? I'm curious how you make the money date fun. That's what
Within a financial advisor. Instead of going to a restaurant, you go to their
Dave and
office.
Buster's.
To their
Yeah.
office,
Their
Oh.
office, yeah. And you look at charts.
Yes. Wait a
minute.
Everybody loves a good chart.
I think he's
Everyone
done this before.
right?
I may have.
everyone loves. Yeah.
Sorry, you were going to say something probably serious. My bad.
No, unfortunately not. It was more of, you said money date, but is it like a date or literally is it like a date can be
Yeah.
shopping, going on a trip, or
No. You don't want to do that.
you don't want to do that. You don't.
You don't want to spend money while you're trying to figure out what your
No?
finances
Okay.
look like.
I mean, I said it jokingly, but
Yeah.
it could be something like that, right? Like, let's
yeah,
go
it
talk to
can.
a financial advisor, a disinterested third party. Let's look at budgets. And
Yes.
We'll make it fun. I'll
Right.
wear a cool hat or something. Anyway,
Yeah.
we'll set up
No, yeah. A date can be anything that you want it to look like, right? It could be like I always tell couples like, hey,
his dates are. You don't want to know what his dates look like.
That's why I'm asking very specific questions.
Yeah, very.
Define date.
Define. What
Yes.
does Bali look like?
Does it
this
involve-
time of year?
The both of us have to be happy at
Yeah.
this point.
Just one. Right?
Just one.
person.
One person.
One spouse.
I feel like these are real questions and not rhetorical questions.
We wish they were rhetorical.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they are not.
Dates can look like whatever you and your partner agree to. Yeah. So I usually do not recommend Bali, but I do recommend, hey, go to dinner, have a glass of wine, bust out the spreadsheets or whatever, but at least it doesn't feel so tense. Because sometimes, again, money can feel really tense, right? And you got to go back to what are your basic necessities? And a lot of the times, couples come back and say, you know what? We had a review of our finances and we have money. We're just not spending it or allocating it in the right place. So just by having that conversation, it's like, okay, I'm no longer as stressed as I thought I needed to be.
My wife would love that conversation. We're not spending it. She's like, I'll figure out how to do that.
I said, you're not spending it in the right place.
Well, I gotta tell you, something that's been coming up a lot lately, kind of along those same lines, is lifestyle creep. You heard it? You heard of that lifestyle creep? You know what that-
Creep?
Yeah, creep.
No.
Lifestyle. You mentioned earlier, right? Like 10 years into marriage, our income should be higher than it was when we first got married, right? So as we make more money, we tend to spend more money. Hence lifestyle creep.
Yeah,
It's a real thing.
it is.
Any thoughts around that?
Yep. Conversations aren't happening, right? We get all this influx of money, and what happens is that the lifestyle that we were living at this salary or this range now automatically increases and jumps to this one because now we have all this money, right? And then what happens is that your lifestyle isn't sustainable, or we think like, man, we just got like an influx of money. Like, where's all the money going? When you start asking those questions, it's because you're trying to, in a sense, like keep up with the Joneses, right? Type of deal. And you're not having those conversations, which means that you haven't talked about how you even wanted to use that money, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let the record reflect the therapist said that, not the financial advisor. It's not us just trying to get you to invest more. We're just-
Is a midlife crisis a real thing? Is
Yeah,
is that a thing?
identity
Oh,
shift.
Identity shift.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. Trying to figure out who you are in the world when.
Sorry. We both had the same thought.
Would you like to share that thought?
Yeah. Why are you asking, huh?
Is it the right place, the right people?
Right.
Is this
I feel
reflect?
safe.
Is this reflective
This
of your
is a safe
lapels today?
place.
I don't at all. No.
They don't know me.
It's okay.
Right.
It's okay. It's okay.
No, I'm sorry. We interrupted. Go
No,
ahead.
I don't know.
We're waiting. Is it a real thing?
I'm observing. Yeah.
Oh.
Got very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Sounds like it is, buddy.
It is,
Like,
it is.
and
Okay.
her hours are Monday through Friday.
Yeah, identity shift, right? And again, it could be a lot of different things, right? Changes in life, style, or age, right? Trying to figure out like, oh gosh, do I need to do something to make myself feel relevant or to make myself feel accepted or belong? Yeah.
Speaking of identity shift,
Careful.
I wasn't until you said that.
Tread lightly, pal. Tread lightly.
No, let's end on a fun topic. Well, I think kind of fun. Okay, so probably not a diagnosable thing in the DSM, but sudden wealth syndrome.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is that?
It's when you come into money, right, unexpectedly, or even if there's been this known money, right, that's coming to you, like inheritance of some sort. You don't know what to do with it, and it shifts again how you see yourself and how you fit into the world, and that could be a recipe for disaster sometimes.
Why is that?
Again, how you think, right, how you thought about money that you had is going to shift, and it's going to be very different from the money that you're gaining. And we always think, well, I shouldn't say always. I would say that most people, right, may consider what life would look like if they had this much more money, right? If I just had 10,000, 100,000, 200, like, oh, I would do all these things, right? And then all of a sudden you get in, you're like, ooh, okay, like now I want to do all those things, but there's no plan in place, right? And that's where, again, some people become vulnerable to losing some of that money, right? Or not gaining some of those, reaching some of those goals that they had without a plan of action. But also it creates a sense of guilt, right? That sometimes we may feel responsible for other people that we left behind because it shifts your social circles, right? Money has a lot to do with the social circles that you are a part of. And so that's why sometimes people that come from places of abundance and wealth sometimes give back to nonprofits or give back to, in other ways, because it does something for us, right? We're always at the forefront. We may not be conscious of it or intentional about it, but we're always at the forefront. I read this article a long time ago that talked about how people in self care professions are what's the word I'm looking for? See, it left my mind because I was offended when I read it. Selfish. Talked about how people in self-care professions are selfish because primarily they're doing it for themselves. And I really had to take a look at myself and thought like, oh, am I going into this profession for myself? And it was about me. It was about my own story that I wanted to alleviate other people from feeling or experiencing what I went through. Right. And so again, when I did some of that exploration, it really helped clear not all my biases, but some of my biases, right? And it really helped me become a better therapist. And so again, when you come into something new in your life, it's going to shift you from this circle to this circle. And sometimes we don't know how to do that because again, identity is challenged.
That's what you typically see like with lottery winners, right? They get this absorbent amount of money right away. And they went from, and it's not like it's a small, class shift up. It's a drastic shift up. And a lot of them go through those finances, in a couple of years, and it's just gone. And it's just gone because there's no mental preparation as far as what their life looks like now compared to what they were before with that money.
Yeah, and they don't have people to guide them. Right. So this is where financial advisors come in. This is where lawyers and all sorts of people that you need, they always say you need to have an accountant, right? A lawyer and a doctor in your life. And it's because those are like basic fundamentals of how we live, right? Our health, any type of behaviors, right? Lawyer wise. And then of course, money. Money is a resource. It's how we essentially sustain a lifestyle.
Yeah, you said something interesting that I don't know why I never thought of. Usually it's kind of, these guys are perfect.
Right.
But my fault, apparently, what I just gathered, my fault is sometimes we'll do that like after you get the money. Right? Like you're expecting an inheritance, you're expecting a settlement, you're expecting the sale of of a business. And we have general idea what we're going to do. But if I hear you right, it might be good to like, you're going to come into money. Hey, hey, X amount's going to savings, Y amount's going to taxes, Z amount you can just go spend or blow with no guilt or remorse.
Yep.
Is that?
You're preparing them. Yep. Because if you say, okay, I'm coming into $1 million, it's too wide for them. Whoo, $1 million? I can do whatever I want with $1 million. But when you say, no, let's bring it in a little bit, right? And let's bring it in even more. And this is what you're left with. And it's not necessarily what you're left with, it's because you're trying to set them up for their future, right? So when you have conversations about, yes, it's this amount, but this amount goes here and this amount goes here, and then this is what you could do to continue to grow, right? To continue to have it to work for you, then they start to go from this to this. And then all of the thoughts and ideas of whatever they thought they were going to buy or wherever they thought they were going to go starts to become more realistic, right? As opposed to very generalized. Yeah. So anytime somebody is coming into even like inheritance, right? Like if you have your parents that have a business and they know that they're going to pass it on to their children, they should be having those conversations with them already, right? Of how, I'm going to give you an example without giving identity away. There was this person that I worked with that came into a very successful business that parents had built from the bottom up, right? And they knew they were going to get that, right? And then parents, one parent died, the other parent retired. It was theirs. And even though they had known all their life they were going to come into it, they had no idea what to do with the abundance of success that was given to them on their lap. Because it was like, it's yours, but like, now what do I do with all this, And even though they never yearned for anything because they had, what they needed growing up, all of a sudden it was like, oh, but now I lived my lifestyle here. And you're telling me I could live my lifestyle up here? Let's do it, right? But that's a disaster right there. That's a recipe for disaster because they're not in the mindset to continue to grow that for themselves.
Yeah, that reminds me of a great philosopher that once said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Is he a philosopher?
Mike Tyson.
Yeah, philosopher, boxer, whatever. So like that, I don't know. So you can make all the best plans in the world, but until you actually receive that money, you kind of don't really know what that feels like or what you're going to do.
Unless you've done preparation with the 4 things that I've talked about. How you think about it and how do you feel about it, and then what's the behavior associated to that. So if I start to understand that I'm coming into this amount of money, right, and I think about what it feels like, well, I feel excited, I feel, like I'm going to be able to do all of the things that I want to do, right? And in my body, it feels, good and I feel on top of the world. Well, hold on, but that's not the reality of what you really get to do with it. So now I have to go back and shift my mindset. Now I have to think about it in a different way. Oh no, I do have to invest in this and I do have to, okay, so now the feelings start to shift, right? So there is preparation that you can do. You just have to make sure that you're attacking all of them. Yeah.
Do all those things before you submit your Pick 7 tickets in. This is what I'm going to do with that first 10 million and the second 10.
You're manifesting it. So
Imagine every Wednesday you're doing that.
every Wednesday.
Have a date with yourself and go over
That's
those
it.
4 things.
You get better at planning if you're doing it every week. It's all that repetition.
Put it out into the universe
That's
and
it.
it will be yours.
That's it.
Yeah.
We'll tell you what. On behalf of James Credo, because he got it free therapy, we thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was fantastic.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Yeah, it really, really, really was beneficial and insightful. Again, 7% of the CFP exam is based on behavioral finance.
Yep.
So,
And that's probably going to continue to increase
Yep.
that percentage, I would assume, over time.
yeah.
Yeah.
Does anyone else feel like they need to go get the licensed financial therapist designation?
Who's paying?
And on that note, no, we appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
And we appreciate you tuning into another episode of Our 2 Cents on Your Dollars.